I do find this to be really important for all of us as we're learning, and I've been doing a lot more reading. So for example, we have the Bay Mills Indian community, which, as I understand it, means that there are more than one tribal people that were legally brought together. It may be Odawa and Ojibwa. And so how do we reference when tribes, what are the tribal names now, as I understand, were legally how you're recognized by the federal government, but that's feels like that's a different entity than the history of how tribes actually related with each other before the federal government forced this recognition in these legal names. So, and then we have the word Anishinaabe, which encompasses different tribal groups. When do we use, how do we use those together?
It depends on the situation and your audience, and they coexist at the same time. So you'll have these tribal names like the Bay Mills Indian Community, Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians. These are legal names that the tribes decided for themselves. The federal government didn't label them that way or name them. They took that name upon themselves and said, this is how we want to be identified. But once it's established, that's their name legally under federal law. But at the same time, in the same space, they're Anishinaabe, they're Odawa, they're, these traditional cultural identifiers that they're retaining at the exact same time of these legal identifiers. So it's dynamic all the time. And you just can't label, okay, you're all Anishinaabe. Some people, really identify more with Ojibwe than Anishinaabe. And some people identify more with Anishinaabe than Potawatomi. It's all personal preference. And this gets into sovereignty as well, that tribes are self-identifying the way they see fit or see best for themselves. So there's 12 federally recognized tribes in Michigan. They all have different names. They have all different, geographic regions and governments and structure. They're not all the same. And that's one of the biggest stressors I try to get across to anybody I talk to is we're all different. And we don't all look the same. We don't all speak the same. Not every Native person you run into is proficient in their language or their culture. Like, people automatically assume that I know all these songs and dances and ceremonies, and I don't. I just don't have that information. I'm trying to obtain it. But people automatically think that once they find out you're Native, that you just grow up in this culturally rich environment. And that's, some people do, absolutely, but some don't. And they're seeking that out. And some are comfortable not doing that. I have lots of Catholic Odawa friends. They have no interest whatsoever in participating in any cultural events. And they're happy with it. Mm-hmm. That's their choice.
I think I'll just see, are there any follow-up questions from folks online about kind of how to use names? Because we can jump back in, but if that was helpful, Eric, to me.
I just have a clarification. I noticed up here, a lot of people say Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa, and I don't know if that's just a way to shorten it, or if there's a reason people drop the Indians instead of saying Little Traverse Bay Bands of Odawa Indians.
I think it's a little bit of both, just to shorten it up. And then, some people don't identify as Indian. But some really do. I catch myself all the time saying, I'm an Indian guy, or, I'm from an Indian family. It's just embedded for the last 500 years, this term. It's really hard to get away from. And it means indigenous, it means native, it's legal. And some people just say LTBB, just shorten it up even more, or Little Travers. They just keep shortening it. But it's, again, Jen, it's all personal identify. And I seen one person ask, indigenous, is that a correct term? And I got mixed feelings on it. It's a real colonial term. Yeah. We didn't call ourselves indigenous. We didn't call ourselves Native. We called ourselves Anishinaabe, Odawa. And so you keep having these Western labels put on us, layer after layer, and it starts, you got to dig through these layers to get to the Odawa or the Anishinaabe. So I'm not a huge fan of Indigenous. And I've, picked up a language book by Ray Kiyogama. He was a language instructor here his whole life in Harbor Springs. Awesome individual. He passed on a few years ago. And Ray's passion was the language. And right in the first page of his book, he goes, I despise the term Indigenous. It's just really strong because that's not me. I'm not Indigenous. I'm Odawa. Mm-hmm. It's like, wow, Ray, to me, he nailed it. Like, don't label me. I label myself. So this is what we're in, though. This era of labeling everybody and everything. I'm not offended when somebody says I'm Indigenous, but then that's a term that you use for plants and animals and all these other things. So we're the same token getting put in these categories that we've been put in for so long of, one with nature, the same category as an animal, savage. So mystic is another thing that we've been labeled quite through time, that, you can just go into the woods and, like I said, call birds and talk to raccoons. This is all Pocahontas BS and so on and so forth. But that's gets into this category. So I'm not enamored with Indigenous, and then even Native. I see people with these bumper stickers saying Native, and it has a Michigan mitt for the I. So they're taking the term, and this is how appropriation works. So it happens real quick with a real catchy little sticker or a sweatshirt. And I'm Native. I'm like, well, yeah, I guess you were born here. That's Native, but it's diluting what the term Native means for us, because all of a sudden I'm a Native person. So tribe name.
We have another question here about First Nations or First Nations people.
That's a Canadian thing. We don't use that term at all in the States. I see the reason for using First Nations, but it's a legal term in Canada. So in the States, we just stay away from it, just so it doesn't confuse people. So to me, it's okay. It's weird because you say, okay, you're a First Nation, but they're not treating them as nations. They're treating them as subordinates, or they're colonizers. So you come in and colonize this area. You don't do that to another nation to a certain degree. So it has, a strong tone to it, but it doesn't have the foundation, like to treat somebody like a nation. So I'd rather be called Anishinaabe than First Nations.
Eric, I am still unclear who Anishinaabe refers to compared to Odawa and Potawatomi and
yeah.
So again, this is just my upbringing and my understanding. And you can like talk to 10 Indians and they're going to give you 10 different answers. But Eric says, from Eric's experience, that Anishinaabe roughly translates into the good people or the first people. And the Anishinaabe are the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi together. We're the Anishinaabe. And we started to get labeled in these separate tribal groups by Europeans. They said, okay, this is the Odawa group and this is the Ojibwe group. But if we got in time machines and came back 1,000 years to this area, I bet all my life savings, but that everybody be saying we're Anishinaabe. There was different bands and groups of Anishinaabe, but we're Anishinaabe people.
What can you tell us about the language similarities between Odawa, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Allas?
It's so as any, like I say, any tribal nation, there's distinctions that separate us. And I'll keep saying this over and over. We're not the same people as the Navajo and the Cherokee. They're different tribes, different nations. And one of the key differences is language. in that we have our own language, Anishinaabe, and we have different dialects of it. So the Odawas speak a little differently than the Ojibwe in Minnesota. And the Minnesota Ojibwe speak differently than the Potawatomi down in southern Michigan. So there'll be different words based on environment, primarily different. I don't want to say, we didn't have slang, it was dialect, but everybody understood each other. And the closest analogy I could use is if somebody from Ireland talked to somebody from England. They understand each other. It's the same language, it's just different.
Mm-hmm.
And this language spread from Maine all the way to Minnesota. It's a huge, it's Western people call it Algonquin, but we call it Anishinaabe.
That's really helpful to me. You know, if others have questions on this, it feels like or else we can move on. There's a lot of other questions. That's really helpful. Thanks, Eric. Let's see. A lot of folks wanted to ask you more about your work as an educator. Ed asked, how do you feel about negative reactions to restorative education efforts like the 1619 project?
I haven't had, well, I've had some passive aggressive pushback where, you know, I'll have somebody tell me, oh, somebody's parents weren't happy, or somebody said that this wasn't very appropriate, but never face to face. Nobody's ever come up to me and said, you're teaching a bunch of lies and, you know, reconstructive history, revisionist history. It's never been like that. It's always this real passive aggressive way. But I gauge my response on the kids, and the kids have always had favorable responses. And I've had the good fortune of working with some of these classes in Harbor Springs from third grade to all the way to their seniors. In this last year's graduating class at Harbor Springs, I worked with from fifth grade to their seniors, and I was their commencement speaker. And it was a really cool experience to like send them off. And some of these kids are like, yeah, we want Eric to be part of this whole, this day. And so to me, that says they're the ones that are receptive. They're the ones, we have conversations and follow-up questions, and they're the ones that I'm really targeting, so to speak. Of course, I want buy-in from the parents and administration and so on and so forth. Don't get me wrong. But the kids are listening when you tell them the truth sells itself. You can't deny it. You can have all these other distractions and, opinions and ideas, but when the kids hear it and they see it, they know. It's just how you give it to them and how you present it is really critical. And the truth's always going to get pushed back. I mean, it's just the way it is. And it just makes it more difficult when you have things coming from the Oval Office saying, okay, this is this executive order saying you can't teach this because it's un-American. I mean, that's a real kick in the teeth. That's what I'm more worried about than anything else. But hopefully things will change and we'll get back on track. But that shows that we have work to do as well.
So there's kind of a follow-up connected question that Casey brought that I'd like to share here about your strategies for reaching adults who get combative or defensive when they're faced with historical truths that change their way that their idealized notion of America is. Like, how do you deal with adults that push back?
Facts, truth. I mean, that's what I try to arm myself with the most, is just facts. It's undeniable facts, and also facts that come from the other side. So this is from government records. It's from your side. Your population wrote this and said this, and just trying to have as much information as possible that is non-refutable. This is, checked by multiple sources. This is, just pretty straightforward stuff. And then also, I've had people come and be confrontational about, telling lies, or this is, fake news, or what term they want to use. And at some point it's just disengaging, and not wasting time and energy on somebody who's not going to listen and just want to argue or fight. So I just withdraw. If I see somebody's truly wanting to have a conversation, I'll go down that road. But if it's just purely confrontational, just to push my button, which happens quite a bit, just unplug. I'm not doing this. This is unhealthy. It's manipulative. It's just not where I want to be. So walk away.
There's also a good question here from Jeff, kind of focused again on your role as an educator, asking about how you think Indigenous youth and teens, I think specifically of today, see their future compared to how you viewed your future in your teenage years. How do you think teens are feeling?
That's a tough one, because my teenage years were pretty self-destructive. They were it was chaos. It was just a lot of substance abuse, a lot of partying, and so my teenage years were rough, and that's kind of what built me to do what I do now, is going through those experiences with my community, not just Native but non-Native as well. But a lot of Native people I was with, died of overdoses or alcoholism, accidents, and I'm seeing less of that to some degree with kids now, but it's still there. I mean, we just had a horrible incident in our community a few days ago where a tribal member, her daughter, she was in her early 20s, she might have been a teenager, she was stabbed to death down in Mount Pleasant at a party. 2:30 in the morning, there was a fight, she got stabbed and died. So this is still here, this environment. But I see more kids, teenagers, engaging in cultural events and being more community orientated, so to speak. They're playing lacrosse, they're going fishing, they're going to dances at powwows together, hunting. We did that to some degree, but I see kids doing that a little bit more. But at the same time, there's still this party element, this substance abuse element that's always hovering around kids. And it's a little bit more intense now than when I was a teen because of prescription drugs and pills. The stakes are a lot higher. Because when I was a teen, it was like smoking weed and drinking. But now it's, taking these pills that once you take them, you're addicted. And so it's worrisome. It's a very big concern.
So I had a question that I wrote down right after you finished last week, and I hope it's not too personal, but you seemed like you were open to this, but you've referenced your mother and your family quite a bit as being important to you personally, but also it feels like they were important within your tribe. Wonder if you could just share a little more, because your family history and how that brought you to where you are, because it seems like it's important to you.
It is. It's everything. And when people ask me what is being tribal to you, I think of family, but I also think of home. That's more the term, a feeling I get. It's not just my immediate family, but it's my place. I grew up in Cross Village, and it's my extended family with the Odawa out in Cross Village who, took me in. They fed me. They helped raise me, and were just always kind and giving. So family to me it expands just beyond your home, your house, I should say. But my immediate family is huge. I mean, my mom was just everything. I mean, she was this firecracker militant woman out in Cross Village. It was part of the first tribal council for Little Traverse in the 80s, fighting for treaty rights. And we were dirt poor. There was poor, then we would say there's Indian poor. We were Indian poor. I mean, there was like 10 people living in my house, coming and going. And looking back, that really was a blessing to have that type of community where we're, bonding and, helping each other out through the struggle. And my grandma helped raise me. My dad was never in the picture. So my grandmother filled that role as the other parent. So I had a very strong female upbringing, and they were always there. And I'm the oldest of all my grandma's grandchildren. So I was the first. And yeah, it was just this feeling of us. It has to be, we take care of us. But then I seen that with all these other Odawa families, like they're the same thing, but then they would bring others in. And like, this has been going on for thousands of years. This isn't new. This is old, of taking care of each other just from a day-to-day basis. And that's what established what being Odawa is to me, is taking care of each other and working hard. My mom was a hard worker, and she was part of this amazing movement to get federal reaffirmation, the first tribe to do this in the country. And she was part of a long line of people, trying to get our rights recognized. So growing up in that environment, is why I do the things I do now, because I seen it firsthand. And then when she phased out of being part of tribal government, she's like, it's your turn now to do something, and just do something. It's like, be a bum, work. So
Yeah. Thanks. So one other question, and then I want to move us into, but this question actually, I think, does move us in that direction. Susan Odgers asked to talk a little about allyship and your thoughts on, because this is where we want to go into our conversation as groundwork, is, how can we be better allies? But I think it'd be really helpful to hear your thoughts on that again, real directly.
yeah, and allies is something that is brought up quite a bit, and I don't want to get this confused with saviors. Like, you're going to come in and save the tribe, or we're going to pull you out of your depths. And that's this real paternalistic attitude that tribes have had to deal with since 1492, that these people are going to come and look at your situation and, assess it and say what's right and wrong and then fix it, when the tribes have no say in it whatsoever. This is from day one, from contact. So allies is good, saviors is bad. And when being a good ally is just taking the time to listen. And one of my elders very eloquently put it, he's like, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much how my face is. And he goes, no, you're supposed to listen as twice as much as you talk. And so just keep listening. And then when it's your time to talk, you'll know. So to share space in a respectful manner and treat, tribal nations as any other ally. If you go into any other, whether it's a gay community or a rural community or African-American community, it's all the same. We're just people with our differences. So just having that respect, but also that space to learn and just listen and share space and share agency when decisions are made. That's a big thing of being a good ally. And also knowing when to pull back and not going in full force and saying, we're going to do this, this, and this, but okay, this doesn't work for us. This doesn't work for our organization, and we won't do it. And that's okay. And we'll focus on this. And also realizing maybe this isn't a good partnership. You don't have to force yourself on somebody. If you're not getting that, if it's not reciprocating, that's okay.
Yeah, that's helpful. It's really helpful. All right. Well, I know what we had planned. Oh, go ahead, Mary. I do want to let people follow up.
I have been so shocked and horrified at the statistics for sexual abuse and killing of, would it be Anishinaabe women? And I know that we haven't been able to get the Senate to get the renewal of the Violence Against Women's Act passed. Are there other things that we can do to help with that issue?
Well, for one, just bringing awareness to people that this is occurring. And, there's different organizations that are doing work like Amnesty International. Tribes themselves are working with some states on, state laws about human trafficking. And so just educating yourself and then bringing that education to others is really important. And then it starts with the individual. So if you have, programs, with tribal youth that you see are going on, if you could support those, because these programs and engagement with kids is really important to, show that they're valued, that they're cared for. And this is where being a good ally is. Maybe you see a program with Native youth and you're not, you may not be leading the program or even part of it, but you're supporting it, like by lending some type of resources or information, just whatever. So I'm a firm believer in being proactive and say, okay, GTB is doing this event with their kids, support it and try to encourage it. And maybe down the road, Groundworks looks at having some type of event that's co-sponsored or in conjunction with the tribe. And I worked with Casey Haggerty a lot with food, and I think that's such a understated value of eating good food and having healthy food. Maybe there's a farm that the tribal kids help manage down the road, or a garden, and they harvest and they work together to produce something that's healthy, instead of reacting to like, okay, this girl went missing, what do we do to try and find her? Let's create opportunity and environments where the girl doesn't go missing, and just never have that happen if possible. So that's my idea about this, because like I said, we just had tragedy in our community where this girl was killed, and it's right. It's always right there. And how do we try to get to these kids and before, they go down these certain avenues?
Thank you.
All right. What I'd like to do now, this has been super helpful, Eric, but is to kind of focus us on those questions of groundwork as allies, and to shift us before we do that, because Megan is telling me in the private chat that she knows how to break us into groups, which is really cool, technically. I don't know exactly, Eric, how you can jump into the groups, but we'd like to have you in every group. I don't know if we can do that, but one at a time maybe. But I just want to quick remind us all of that what we're doing here. This is, Eric was our, after Michelle was kind of our first speaker, but we do want to bring in more conversations. And we do have a meeting scheduled in December, I think the 10th, with Brian Newland, who is tribal chair for Bay Mills Indian Community and has been a great partner, ally in the Line 5 work that I've gotten to know Brian quite well. And Brian is also a lawyer and so a tribal chairman. So he'll bring some perspective that way. So I'm looking forward to that as future conversation. But where I think we're going and where we want to talk right now, having just had this great conversation with Eric, is to answer or to start to talk a little bit about what we can do as allies. And I have some questions here that I'll drop them in the chat, and then let's see.
I got it, Lively.
Did you already do it? Oh, well, I'll do it again. All right, sorry. So just to kind of talk to, obviously we should just regroup and how are we feeling about what Eric presented, but more specifically, what can groundwork be doing? Like, let's just start to, and have a note taker in our group and start to come up with some ideas of things we can do to be better partners. And then to ask more of those questions of what more do we want to learn? Help us. Christina and I and Michelle are trying to bring forward information so that we can be more informed. If there's other things we want to learn, and let's hope we can keep Eric available to us, because Eric's been just phenomenal. But let's think about what else we want to learn. So those are the three key questions as we go into our groups. And I don't think we'll come back, because we don't have time to come back to the big group. So we'll just go for the 12 minutes. So before we do that, can we somehow like appreciate Eric Hemenway for the wonderful job that,
No, no, it's you know,
dude, thank you.
no, it's just, you know, we have a incredible, when I say we, it's, you know, my department of archives and records, I have an incredible resource I've been blessed to be a part of, and this wealth of information and experience. So it's no good having all this if you're not sharing it. It's, you know, what's the use of having all of this wealth of information and experience, and if you just hoard it? And it's just as important for me to educate people who are non-native as it is to educate, you know, native individuals about history. Nobody's going anywhere. You know, we're all here, so you got to make the best of it. And having some understanding is so critical, and being good neighbors and allies. And just, I'm here, Jim, and Groundwork, you know, we're not going anywhere. And I've got to, you know, give a shout out to Casey again. You know, it's a really great experience of, you know, working side by side to develop lesson plans. And Jen brought me into this. You know, she invited me to say, hey, we got these young teachers that we want to work with, and what can we do to, you know, make this better? So, you know, taking those first steps is important, and not having these, I guess, I never got the feeling of a preconceived notion with Jen or Casey. And that's nice. You know, sometimes I go into groups and like, oh, you're native and you got a casino and you're rich, and like, no, I'm not. You know, I work for a living and pay, you know, it's just not like that. So it's good. It's going in a good direction. So we're here.
Well, yeah, thank you. I'd love to be able to keep you on our team as we have questions and need more help. And I think, you know, allies is one word. I think we can call each other friends, I hope, because I feel like I'm getting to know you. As challenging as it is over Zoom, I like that word too.
Yeah, friends are better than allies.
Right on. Appreciate it, Eric.